illusion of the wings hitting anything at the Pentagon, like you had at the North Tower. You can see the outline of the aircraft at 25-degree bank angle. You can clearly see the outline of the number 1 engine, fuselage, and number 2 engine. It's a 25-degree bank. The wing dihedral is up in flight, and you can clearly see the outline of that airplane. But you can't find anything like that in the Pentagon.
Very well, they admitted there was no gasification, but another theory was immediately put forward. It suggested that in order to enter a hole 5 meters wide, at a certain moment, the airplane somehow closed up its wings, just as dragonflies do. The plane entered the hole. Oh, look, there they are. The engine and the other pieces of the plane were found there.
One of my experiences in the Army was being in charge of the Army's imagery interpretation for scientific and technical intelligence during the Cold War. I measured pieces of Soviet equipment from photographs. It was my job. I look at the hole in the Pentagon, and I look at the size of an airplane that was supposed to have hit the Pentagon. The plane does not fit in that hole.
2 samples of video footage captured from the Pentagon's parking lot have been offered to the world as definitive proof of Flight 77's impact with the Pentagon. They're almost identical.
Jet engines don't emit white smoke. You have some white smoke would come out of the aft end of whatever kind of vehicle. Quite frankly, there's not enough in those photographs to tell exactly what it was, but you can tell what it wasn't. And it didn't have the size as compared, if it was a real 757-200, it would be much bigger than the vehicle we do see in the picture.
With the best will in the world, can you see an airplane here? The Pentagon tells us you cannot see the airplane because, unfortunately, it passed between one frame and the next. One frame and the next. So where is the airplane?
In Washington, D.C., we have one of the most restricted airspaces in the world. It's called P-56. It has a separate radar tracking system and a separate military response system.
P-56 is that restricted airspace that is around the Pentagon and the White House, and it is a highly, highly, highly sensitive area. There are supposed to be no unknown aircraft that can go through there.
That has a air defense identification zone in a 50-mile radius around D.C., and then it has a protected zone 17 miles around the Washington Monument and an inner protected zone 3 miles around the Capitol. That space is essentially unbreachable. It has to be because of the importance of the buildings there.
It's like an aviation no man's land. Nobody goes in there. Nobody.
They have F-16 and F-18 jets at Andrews Air Force Base, about 10 miles south of D.C. They also have the 113th National Guard Air Wing at Anacostia Naval Air Station that can send scrambler jets up in a very short period of time. Both are in place that day. Neither one responds at all until after the Pentagon is hit. In addition to that, the Pentagon has its own defenses.
If a plane, any kind of a plane, was coming in towards the Pentagon, why didn't the anti-aircraft missiles batteries that are there, why didn't they fire to protect the building? This is, after all, the most heavily protected building on the planet.
I'd like some conclusion. I mean, I'm sure the families would, and I'm sure the military knows a lot more than we do in the government, but I'm just astounded that they don't share more of the information that's available.
Now, this video clip that we've just examined came again from the Naudet brothers documentary that was being filmed in the streets of New York City on the morning of September 11th. This documentary about the New York City firefighters was going to be assembled at a later date, and it was not televised. In fact, there was no live coverage at all of Flight 11 as it hit the North Tower. After all, it was a surprise attack. So if there was no live television coverage of the first plane hitting the first tower, how do we explain the following comment from George Walker Bush?
How did you feel when you heard about the terrorist attack?
Well, Thank you, Jordan. Well, Jordan, you're not going to believe what state I was in when I heard about the terrorist attack. I was in Florida. And my chief of staff, Andy Card, well, actually, I was in a classroom talking about a reading program that works. And I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on.
The president tells us he sees, on an ordinary TV set outside a school classroom, the first plane hit the World Trade Center. He gives the oddly reinforcing detail that, quote, the TV was obviously on, unquote. He continues.
I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And I said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think about it.
Didn't have time to think about it. As if his being told, time to meet the kids, Mr. President, stops all his thought processes concerning the remarkable image of what he's told us he's just seen on an ordinary TV, on top of all his knowledge of the unprecedented situation from earlier in the morning. But anyway, could George Bush have seen on ordinary TV the first plane hit the World Trade Center? No, he could not have. The footage of that first strike only shows up on television the next day, September the 12th, 2001. It was taken by a French documentary crew that happened to be in downtown New York.
Well, Dan, not far from here, a passerby found the passport of one of the hijackers.
How does a passport fly out of a man's pocket through a 400-mile-per-hour airplane crash, survive 9,000 gallons of jet fuel, and land intact on a sidewalk 1,000 feet below? Mahed Maked and Nawaf al-Hazmi's ID cards discovered in the wreckage at the Pentagon. An ID, Saeed al-Ghamdi's passport, Ahmed al-Nami's driver's license, passport photos, and a business card.
On September the 16th, one of the alleged hijackers of Flight 11, Abdel Aziz al-Omari, went to the Jeddah consulate to protest his innocence to US officers. Al-Omari, a pilot from Saudi Airlines, receives an official apology from the American officers in Riyadh. Then, on the 22nd of September, Walid al-Shahiri announces he is still alive. He too is supposed to have hijacked Flight 11. From his house in Casablanca, Morocco, the impertinent al-Shahiri declares his innocence. The following day, the 23rd of September, the Daily Telegraph publishes the protestations of innocence of Sahih